level of business operations, a different level of corporate governance, and then saying that okay, I want to now grow through the public markets route, and the route is very efficient, as we have seen. I think if that mindset changes, then you'll have a large number of companies coming to this market.
Sure. Ashwin Parekh, I would like for you to respond to that. So Prithvi Haldia is saying that even for small amounts of money, for example, you have companies which are approaching the primary markets. Is that because there's not sufficient financing support available then?
Yes, see, there are 2-3 things. I mean, I must say that instead of looking at the micro issues, if I have to look at the larger issues, I mean, I was on a government committee which concluded its findings last year, and the report is out in the Ministry of Finance site, which talked about the funding of SMEs and MSMEs. Now, if I look at the requirements, I mean, as Pawan rightly said, today the banking system is funding 500,000 crores. You're talking about a substantial need, substantial amount of requirement. So that was one. Second was the ability of these borrowers to come clean, have good governance, have good financial statements, reliable financial statements, has not been there. I mean, the changes will happen if they really have to go to any platform to seek money, whether it's public money from banking system or whether it is from the market in terms of equity.
And you have the Mudra Bank, which is funding these small amounts.
These small amounts, exactly. So therefore, you to come clean. So that was one. So we thought that the answer lies in structural changes rather than go through the traditional route. The traditional route of IPOs is perhaps more meant for mid-size and large corporates, and there is already an established market. It's been there for years now. I mean, more than decades now. But I thought to create an IPO market, is that the answer? That's the question that kept on coming at the committee level. And I thought structural changes are required. One is very happy to note that at that meeting, the RBI had also, at that committee, the RBI had also two representatives, two members who were representing the RBI. And I suppose it was noted that structural changes are. So on one side, you were talking about differentiated banking. Small finance bank could be one of these solutions, for instance, which is going to play in a regional level, at a regional level, and it will have to find effective economic activities, at that regional place where they're going to put up their play. So whether it is Ujjivan or whether it is anybody else, they're going to find that play, and they will have to approach SMEs and MSMEs, to really create a good portfolio or a good credit book. So that's one thing that. The other thing I thought was some of the structural changes. One possible structural change that was envisaged, and then I think Prithvi touched upon this, something very important. What is becoming critical for the MSMEs and SMEs is to shore up equity rather than debt. Debt they may still be able to find. If they are performing well, if they are in proper sectors, then they may still be able to raise debt. Whether they can get equity is a question mark. So we thought, why can't we have the banking system itself create, equity funds for MSMEs, for instance. So instead of once again pushing them to the IPO market, which I'm afraid is the subject of the discussion today, but I'm taking you away from IPO kind of a. If you have the banking system, for example, imagine that you had 3 or 4 very large foreign investors working with, say, someone like State Bank of India or someone like Bank of India, for instance, and I had actually attempted this for Bank of India. You create an equity fund for MSMEs. Now, MSMEs debt banking system knows very well. If they've already lent 500,000 crores, they have a good understanding of their performance, their past repayments, record and everything else. To create an equity fund to shore up their equity so that the leveraging is sort of available to the MSMEs is something that we thought was a structural change.
One question to you, Pawan, before I get quick closing comments. We're typically seeing a lot of companies which are in the media space, logistics space, which are going through the IPO route. Do you expect more interest coming in from your traditional MSMEs, like say from the manufacturing space as well?
So it's a fair question, and I think we see a similar trend happening, let's say, in the VC space also. And we've always looked at banks as the ones that would do the more mainstream, trade and working capital kind of lending. When we look at the companies that have already listed on the BSE and NSE platform, another interesting aspect that comes out is 70% of those companies belong to the 3 states of Delhi, Gujarat, and Maharashtra, Maharashtra being ahead, which means that I think the companies that have greater access to financial resources or greater access to, to the exchanges or are, in financial centers are taking advantage of the SME platform. So clearly there is an awareness issue that we need to take it to the nooks and corners of the country. There must be good work being done there. And even in terms of the sectors that you talked about, the logistics or some of these sectors where probably there is not so much of a capital investment, but probably more of a flow kind of an investment which is necessary, which is where some of those investments are happening. But the other aspect, in terms of what the other panelists have referred to, is what would it take for this IP platform to take off? In my sort of opinion, we probably need one or two breakthrough IPOs or breakthrough companies. Some have already migrated to the main board, and it's only been 3-4 years that these platforms have really been active. Let's say give it another 2-3 years. Let's say one company breaks through, the 5,000 crore barrier of, let's say, market capitalization, and then you will see a beeline of investors and a beeline of companies coming forward. So I am wanting to be optimistic really on that front. The other aspect that I want to bring to forth, vis-a-vis the banking system, the P2P lending that Parik Bhai talked about, that today banks, although they are the predominant lenders to the MSME space, the lending is typically 500 to 600 basis points above the GSEC rate, whereas let's say the top rated corporate gets about 50 basis points or sometimes even lower than above the GSEC rate, which really is a huge cost differential. So that cost really needs to be minimized through greater information sharing on part of the SMEs. They have to be self-disciplined, and government has to embolden institutions that are actually allowing that sharing of information to happen. If that starts to happen, banks may then be able to take, let's say, a greater risk or probably bring their interest costs down. Today, the lending that's happening through the banking sector is in part, at least, supported by the priority sector lending norms. Right, so one has to envisage or study as to whether banks would lend as much if the priority sector lending norms were not there, and that's really what's holding the SME lending up. One last aspect is in terms of regulatory and structural. If the RBI or the government could probably encourage the banks, through law or through institutional mechanisms, to lend to a wider variety of financial institutions and NBFCs. Banks already lend a lot to NBFCs that's counted as priority sector lending. But if banks were opened up to be able to lend more through other alternative investment classes and that be treated as priority sector lending, you might have a quick fix to the SME financing problem.
Okay, we're running completely out of time on the show, so I'd want 20-second closing comments on what you think is going to change really the face of the MSME listings, as well as what advice you would have for entrepreneurs watching the show. Samit Ghosh, I'd like to start with you.
Well, listing and raising money through IPO is an evolutionary process, and I think you have to start right from the beginning. It's like borrowing from banks, get into the discipline of borrowing from banks, having your audited balance sheet, etc., board. Then you borrow, then you get equity investors, maybe through private equity, etc., and then evolve yourself finally to the IPO. IPO is actually the final stage, and I don't think bulk of the MSME sector is ready for that right now. They require probably much more debt, and the government is doing an excellent job today by promoting that through the Mudra scheme, where banks and microfinance institutions are lending to these institutions. I think it will evolve over years.
Sure. Prithvi Haldia, quick closing comments in terms of what is going to take.
So I just refer to the subject of the debate. Are IPOs a viable option for SMEs? Surely they are a viable option for SMEs. Are they a viable or the only option for the economy? Surely not. So I think we have to pursue the IPO route. As more companies get listed, there are more success stories. And the investors which are coming in are investors who have a risk appetite. They are investing more than 1 lakh rupees in any IPO. We also have seen institutional support coming into many IPOs. And I think IPO market, I see this market growing, but not to very, very large numbers. But I think this will remain to be a very viable option for a lot of SMEs who are willing to become transparent, be high on corporate governance, and are willing to grow through the public market rather than private money.
Sure. Ashwin Parekh?
Well, I would say two quick things. One is the IPO route for the SMEs and MSMEs has to be good. Then I suppose two things. One is if the banks were to participate a little more and assist, in sharing let's say the financial statements and other statements. at least with the investors. I mean, so some kind of that. The second is a digital disruption. I mean, if there was a larger use of digital, let's say, or the technology into, let's say, at least governance and transparency associated with those at least who are listed, who are planning to list, for instance, then I suppose the investors will get more confidence. Then they'll get to see a little bit more of these institutions, and then they come forward to the market, I would say.
I would echo the thoughts of other panelists. I think for MSMEs to really get into the IPO space, they need to really plan early, have transparency and corporate governance, and importantly, also get into professional management. A lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of trying to keep too many things close to themselves. They have to recognize when they're going public, there is public scrutiny, and investors want to see a diversification of the management, getting experts in so that you can truly scale, which is exactly the reason why you are going to an IPO in first place.
All right, gentlemen, Ashwin Parekh, Pawan Bindal, Prithvi Haldia, Samit Ghosh, thank you very much for taking time out and speaking with us today. That's all we have on this edition of Leaders of Tomorrow, MSME Dialogues. Do remember, you can always write to us at leadersoftomorrow@timesgroup.com. You can reach us on social media using the hashtag LOT or call us on the number flashing below on your screens. Thanks for watching.